It is feared that the Prime Minister has drowned. A great search is being made for Mr. Holt off Portsea, Victoria. However, no official announcement has been made as to the fate of the Prime Minister. Mr. Holt went for a swim shortly after noon with a friend, Mr. Alan Stewart, a quarantine officer from the Melbourne suburb of Armadale. They swam out into heavy surf on the ocean side of the Mornington Peninsula. Mr. Stewart told police he saw the Prime Minister dive, but he failed to resurface. Mr. Stewart said he made a short search before sounding the alarm. For the details available so far, we cross to ABC News in Melbourne.
Bob Wilcox from Melbourne in this special 5-state bulletin of ABC National News. Dozens of police, search and rescue squads and divers have been rushed to the area and have been searching since 2 o'clock. Light craft have been braving the heavy seas near Portsea and several aircraft have been in the air constantly. Officials say the sea search is hampered by heavy rolling seas. One lifeboat with 3 men taking part in the search overturned in the surf and was smashed on the rocks. The men had to be rescued by helicopter. The Prime Minister's wife was in Canberra when she heard the news that Mr. Holt was missing in the sea off Portsea. A special aircraft was made available and immediately Mrs. Holt took off for Melbourne. She arrived at Essendon Airport about 4:30 this afternoon. First off the aircraft was Mr. Tony Eggleton, the Prime Minister's press secretary. Newsmen were kept well clear of the aircraft as Mrs. Holt stepped onto the tarmac. The Prime Minister's brother-in-law, Mr. F.V. Holmes, was among those to meet Mrs. Holt at Essendon. Mrs. Holt immediately transferred to a Commonwealth car and set off for Portsea. The car was given a police escort for the journey of almost 70 miles. It's here off the Portsea Ocean Beach that the search is concentrated. All available helicopters are skimming over Port Phillip Bay. More than 100 police, as well as troops and others, are searching the foreshore. Navy crash boats and other vessels are out by the score. The Navy is swinging in a large force of skin divers to help in the search for Mr. Holt. A total of 23 skin divers is being sent to Portsea by road, sea and air. All the men from the Portsea Army Camp and the nearby Flinders Naval Base are searching for Mr. Holt. Crowds of people are waiting outside the gates of the Portsea camp for news of the Prime Minister. A spokesman for the Sorrento Sailing Club said that at the time Mr. Holt disappeared, sea conditions would have been dangerous there. There was a heavy swell and a strong tidal current running. He said that the tide changed about 2 o'clock and anybody helpless in the sea was likely to have been swept out away from the shore. Tonight, more than 1,000 people are gathered around the gates of the quarantine station. Military police have imposed strict security measures and no one without an official pass has been allowed into the area. An ABC reporter at the scene says it's believed that Mr. Holt intended going skin diving later this afternoon following his midday swim. It would have been low tide, ideal for spearfishing, about an hour ago, Eastern Time. The Prime Minister, who is aged 59, has been undergoing treatment for a muscular soreness in his back. This appeared first during recent Senate election campaigns, but he was too busy at the time to undergo treatment. He began the treatment soon after the election. The ABC's political correspondent in Canberra says the situation of Mr. Holt's disappearance is regarded officially in the national capital as serious. The Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. McEwen, is flying to Canberra and he's due there about now, Eastern Time. A White House official said the President was most upset because there was no leader in the world for whom he had more respect and affection than Mr. Holt. It was near midnight, Washington time, when news agency reports were first received there. One of the President's advisors went to the private quarters to inform Mr. Johnson. He was immediately in touch with the American Embassy in Canberra, asking to be notified urgently on any developments. Mr. Johnson was looking forward to seeing Mr. Holt at the summit meeting of Pacific leaders, probably in March. In Washington, where Secret Service men keep the President under strict surveillance, there was surprise that a Prime Minister could be allowed to swim without being closely watched. In New Zealand, radio stations broke into their programs to announce the news of Mr. Holt's disappearance. Reports were also flashed onto television screens throughout the country. The New Zealand Prime Minister, Mr. Keith Holyoake, was informed of Mr. Holt's disappearance immediately news reports reached Wellington. And that's the story from Melbourne. More details as they come to hand.
We repeat that it is feared that the Prime Minister has drowned. A great search is being made for Mr. Holt off Portsea, Victoria. However, no official announcement has yet been made as to the fate of Mr. Holt. However, as soon as any official news of the fate of the Prime Minister becomes available, we shall interrupt our programs to bring it to you. Briefly, the